Welcome one and all to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Master of Faster Tournament! Today, we relive a classic showdown as Kalin Kessler is paired against Lawton, the spearhead of the Malcolm Gang. Kalin has two goals, to empty his hand and to win as fast as possible. The Infernity deck is a pit of dark monsters whose effects can only be activated when you have no cards in your hand. But because you have no resources to save for later, if the duel ever gets shaky, you will forever be relying on whatever singular card comes next to save you. For this reason, his deck not only aims to swarm the field for big synchros or widespread beatdowns, but it comes equipped with burn as well to help kill off your opponent before they have a chance at turning the tides. The sheer number of times this deck can revive monsters is absurd, and that alone can make Kalin an immovable force. He does have bricks though, as his Dark Tuners, Field Spell, and Earthbound Immortal don't mix with his handless strategy at all, and are not easily searchable cards. Worst comes to worst, they can always make way for his side deck crammed with the most broken cards in the game. Infernity Zero, who can keep Kalin alive even when his life points hit 0. Infernity Barrier, a searchable Omni-Negate that defined an era of competitive play. The Void Trap cards, which can literally say no to anything your opponent does. And Infernity Burst, another highly searchable card that can do up to 4,000 damage with no cost. How can any duelist match this sort of devastating power? Let's see if Lawton has a clue. Lawton has one of the most offensive defensive decks ever. This spell trap heavy deck is loaded with loads of effect damage and monster destruction. Similar to Kalin, Lawton's deck has a lot of ways to get to the cards he wants, but it can run out of gas very quickly. The end goal is to use a series of ogres with guns to violently shoot down the opponents and blow up their monsters. And while he has multiple pot cards to comb through his deck and generate advantage, his big weakness is the Gatling Ogre, his signature monster, which has to throw away Lawton's spell and trap cards, taking away his ability to activate them in the first place. Despite this, Lawton is definitely a top contender in the Master of Faster tournament. Now, to see which of these duelists truly is the fastest in the West. Ready, set, duel!
Part 1 of this epic showdown, and we're going to be seeing Kalin taking the first move. He's going to normal summon the Infernity Mirage. When his hand is empty, he can sacrifice the Infernity Mirage to summon any 2 Infernity monsters out of his graveyard. He'll then activate the spell card Contract with the Void, which can be activated when he has at least 3 cards in his hand. He throws away his entire hand to summon any Infernity or level 8 Dark Dragon out of his graveyard after the resolution of the card. So, since he throws away one of the Infernities in his hand, he can technically summon that monster out, and he'll be summoning the Infernity Archfiend with its impressive and respectable 1800 attack, who can grab any Infernity spell, trap, or monster for him. And in this case, he'll grab the Infernity Barrier. Then he'll set his barrier and end his turn with a 0 attack monster in attack mode, mind you. Lawton's going to start off the turn incredibly powerful with the Pot of Greed, followed up by the Sacred Sword of 7 Stars to banish a level 7 to draw a grand total of 4 cards in combination with the Pot of Greed. Then, he'll also go into the Pot of Desires, banishing face down the top 10 cards of his deck to attempt to draw 2 more cards before it gets negated by his Infernity Barrier. He was not able to bait it out with the other 2 draw cards, and so the Desires unfortunately causes Lawton to go negative 11 in card advantage with this situation. Lawton will then go ahead and activate the spell card Card of Burial Magic, which will banish 3 spell cards in his graveyard to draw another 2 cards. He is already through half of his deck on the very first turn that he takes in the duel. He'll set a card face down before passing his turn to Kalin. Kalin will now switch the Mirage into defense mode before entering the battle phase and attacking directly with the Infernity Archfiend, but it will be met with the back attack Ambush, which will end the battle phase and summon an ambush token for every single attack position monster that Kalin owns. It then gets tributed in order to deal 500 points of damage instead. So Lawton will escape damage this time, set a singular card for his next turn, and pass it again. For Kalin's turn, he wants to get rid of his hand at all costs, but he's gonna go ahead and take the one card that is in his hand and generate some future advantage for himself, as well as thinning his deck with the trap card Infernity Inferno, discarding up to 2 cards from his hand and then dumping up to that many number of Infernity monsters from his deck. So he'll throw out the Infernity Patriarch from his hand in order to pitch the Beetle from the graveyard. And now Mirage will sacrifice itself to summon out the Infernity Beetle and the Infernity Guardian. And with no cards in the hand, the level 2 tuner Infernity Beetle can sacrifice itself to summon 2 more copies of itself straight from the hand, deck, or graveyard. One Beetle is going to tune the Archfiend in order to summon the Infernity Doom Archfiend with 2200. And he'll enter the battle phase, swinging in with the Infernity Guardian first because since his hand is empty, Guardian cannot be destroyed by battle or by card effects. So that is a safe 1200 in most situations, and it will be followed up by 1200 from the Beetle and 2200 from the Doom Archfiend. In the second main phase, Doom Archfiend will be tuned by the Infernity Beetle for the Void Ogre Dragon with 3000 attack. When Kalin has no cards in his hand, the Void Ogre Dragon can negate the activation of one of Lawton's spell or trap cards every single turn, and if it manages to negate and destroy it, the dragon will gain 500 attack until the end of that turn. Lawton has to make a big play here somehow, and he'll start off with the Pot of Duality, which will then be negated by the Void Ogre Dragon, who will then boost itself up to 3,500. With no other plays to make, Lawton has to simply end his turn there and take the L. So Kalin wins the first duel. We're gonna see if Lawton can come back around in this second match, and he actually lets Kalin go first. Kalin will simply set 3 cards in his back row and pass his turn, but during Lawton's standby phase will instantly activate the Infernity Inferno, throwing away up to 2 cards from his hand and dumping the same number of Infernities from his deck. So he'll dump his entire hand along with the Infernity Patriarch and Infernity Conjurer. We'll see Lawton open with the Sacred Sword of 7 stars, banishing his Blaster Ogre this time, and he'll set a monster and end his turn there. Kalin playing another card face down and then activating the Creepy Little Punk. This Creepy Little Punk special summons an Infernity monster that is banished in the hand or in the graveyard for Kalin to his side of the field. So he'll bring out the Infernity Mirage for himself, who will sacrifice itself to get 2 more monsters, the Infernity Patriarch and the Infernity Conjurer. Then, he'll tribute the Infernity Patriarch with Infernity Paranoia to summon a monster with the same level but a different name straight out of the deck. In this case, the Infernity Archfiend, who will grab a card out of his deck, or at least it would have if the Infernity Paranoia didn't negate its effect, but it still has its 1800 attack, so it swings into the face down, which is a UFO turtle, summoning out a fire monster with 15 or less attack points in attack position to Lawton's side of the field. In this instance, another UFO turtle, who even though he has less attack points because of the effect of Conjurer, he will not be destroyed in this battle phase because Kalin doesn't want to generate too much advantage for Lawton. He wants to make him try to earn whatever monster he wants to bring out, so Kalin ends his turn here. Then Lawton uses another Sacred Sword, banishing the Big Cannon Ogre, and then after he draws his 2 cards, he summons, finally, the Gatling Ogre. While it only has 800 attack, it can do 800 points of damage for every spell and trap card in Lawton's back row. However, he has to sacrifice said cards first. He will set 4 cards face down, which will allow him to do massive amounts of damage, but he'll also activate the card of Burial Magic, banishing 3 spells in his grave to draw 2 more cards. And now we'll see Gatling Ogre fire, and fire, and fire again, leaving 2 cards in his back row before the UFO turtle crashes itself into the Infernity Conjurer in order to summon out another UFO turtle, crashing again in order to summon out the Blaster Ogre. Blaster Ogre, twice per turn during Lawton's turn, can destroy a face-up attack position monster on Kalin's field and do damage equal to half of its attack points. So, This effect is really powerful and can, in some situations, make up for the fact that it has 0 attack points. The 2 face-down cards that Lawton left for himself are likely to defend the Blaster Ogre since it is incredibly vulnerable. But we'll see it fire and destroy the Infernity Archfiend. But since the Infernity Archfiend was destroyed by an effect, he can go ahead and use this creepy little punk from the graveyard in order to set itself once again, which is a once per turn effect. Then Blaster Ogre is going to fire and destroy the Conjurer, leaving Kalin with only 3,300 life points. He'll use the Infernity Inferno to dump the Infernity Beetle out of his hand and toss out the Infernity Sage from his deck. Infernity Sage will then, since it was thrown away with the card effect, throw out the Infernity Death Gunman. And here comes this creepy little punk to revive the Infernity Mirage, sacrificing itself for the Archfiend and the Beetle. This is card advantage like you've never seen. Archfiend grabbing a spell card that he then sets for himself, and Beetle sacrificing itself to give him 2 level 2 tuner monsters. So he can tune the Archfiend into the level 6 Infernity Doom Archfiend, and then into the level 8 Void Ogre Dragon yet again, swinging in for a potential 3,000 damage against the Blaster Ogre. But Lawton activates his trap card, the Explosive Wall, which can be activated when Kalin declares an attack, destroying the attacking monster and one monster on Lawton's side of the field. Void Ogre Dragon's going to use its ability to negate that effect in order to preserve itself, but Lawton has a response with the bad attack Ambush, which will end the entire battle phase, give himself a token, and then allow him to tribute the token for 500 more points of damage. However, since the trap card was eventually negated, Void Ogre does get 500 points, but it only lasts until the end of this turn. We'll see Kalin banish the Infernity Paranoia spell out of his graveyard in order to add the Infernity Mirage back to his hand, and he has yet to normal summon, so he will do so now. Infernity Mirage is not a once per turn, so it will sacrifice itself for Infernity Doom Archfiend and Infernity Sage, a level 2 tuner monster. Infernity Doom Archfiend will then use its effect to negate the abilities of the Blaster Ogre as long as the Infernity Doom Archfiend is on the field. Then he'll tune the both of them in order to summon the Infernity Doom Dragon. And with an empty hand, Infernity Doom Dragon can destroy a monster on Lawton's side of the field and then do damage in exchange for the Doom Dragon not attacking this turn. But since the battle phase is already over, it couldn't attack this turn anyways. Lawton has to rely on his top deck, and he will activate the Breakthrough skill from the graveyard in order to negate Void Ogre Dragon's effect this turn. Now he can reveal the card that he drew, which was Card of Sanctity, an amazing card to top deck in almost any single situation, and one of the worst cards that Kalin could go up against. Card of Sanctity will allow both players to draw cards until they have 6 in their hand. Lawton, with an empty hand and a deck that revolves around using lots of spell and trap cards, needs every single card that he can get. Kalin, however, will now not be able to use the effects of either one of his synchros or any monster in his deck for that matter until he can somehow burn through 6 cards in the next turn. What a phenomenal play, and the Card of Sanctity leads into the Pot of Greed, drawing 8 cards for Lawton in a singular turn. Then we'll also see him summon the Gatling Ogre before setting 5 cards face down. And the Gatling Ogre will fire, and again, and again. And this is game. Lawton with the comeback. What a phenomenal turn of events, going off of a impeccable top deck from Lawton, and this time in the final round between these two duelists, he will be taking the first move. Lawton simply sets 3 cards and calls it a day. Time to see how Kalin answers, and he'll activate the Blaster cartridge, which will throw away the top 4 cards of his deck and then allow him to draw 1 card and place the Blaster cartridge spell card itself on the top of his deck. Then if he draws it afterwards, it gets sent to the graveyard so that he makes sure he does not draw any more cards this next turn. He'll dump his 4 and activate the Infernity Launcher, which can throw out an Infernity monster in his hand once per turn. So he'll throw out the Infernity Archer and then summon Archfiend, who unfortunately does not get an effect this time around, but will swing in successfully for 1,800 damage, and then Kalin will end his turn. Lawton will activate the Pot of Duality, revealing his top 3 cards of his deck, and then adding 1 to his hand in exchange for not being able to special summon this turn. The other 2 will get sent back into the deck. So we have the Narrow Tunnel Trap card, which can restrict the amount of summons each player can do. The Back Attack Ambush, which can end the battle phase. And another copy of Pot of Duality, which unfortunately can only be used once per turn. Lawton will grab the Narrow Tunnel, set a card face down, and end his turn. And then he'll activate the Narrow Tunnel here. So now both players can only summon 1 monster to their side of the field. And if any player controls 2 or more monsters, they have to destroy the rest until they only have 1 more. Kalin's gonna go ahead and use the Infernity Launcher to toss out the Infernity Archfiend that was in his hand and normal summon Infernity Mirage, making it live with an empty hand. But since he has 2 monsters now, the Narrow Tunnel activates and Kalin will sack off the Infernity Archfiend that was on his field. He will then end his turn here. At the start of Lawton's turn, he'll activate the Infernity Mirage, which is a quick effect, summoning out 2 copies of the Infernity Archfiend, even though one of them will get destroyed. But now he gets to activate the effect of 1 and add the Infernity 0 to his hand. Lawton will start off with another Pot of Duality. This time, we see him reveal another Narrow Tunnel barrel behind the door, which can reflect effect damage. And the Card of Sanctity card that won him the last game. He will add the Card of Sanctity and immediately add it, drawing himself 4 and forcing Kalin to draw 5. Sacred Sword of 7 Stars will activate next, banishing the Blaster Ogre for another draw 2, into the Pot of Greed for another draw 2. And here comes the Gatling Ogre before he activates the Card of Burial Magic for another draw 2. Gatling Ogre will fire and fire and fire again before setting 4 more cards. The Gatling Ogre fires and fires and fires again and 1 more time before Kalin finally activates the Infernity Suppression Trap card he had face down this entire time. When the opponent activates a monster effect while Kalin controls an Infernity monster, the effect is negated and he gets to inflict damage to the opponent equal to the level of the negated monster times 100. Kalin allowed Lawton to burn through every single one of his spell and traps, taking the onslaught of bullets raining down upon him in order to put Kalin in a position where he is completely tapped of his resources before finally negating the Gatling Ogre. With that, Lawton will end his turn there, and even though we see that he has another Card of Sanctity in his hand, Kalin already has 6 cards in his hand, so Card of Sanctity cannot be activated. Kalin will use this creepy little punk to revive an Infernity monster that is banished from the hand or that is in the graveyard, and he picks the Infernity Archfiend, destroying off the one that he already had on the field and ending his turn with that. Then, during Lawton's draw phase, again he'll activate another trap, this time the Infernity Inferno, pitching 2 cards from his hand and 2 monsters from the deck. Lawton will summon another Gatling Ogre, set a card, destroy one of his Gatling Ogres so that he can burn one of the cards in his hand and activate the Card of Sanctity. Kalin is once again reset to a hand size of 6, and Lawton has his resources replenished. But he's not done yet because he activates a Sacred Sword of 7 Stars and then banishes the top 10 cards of his deck to activate the Pot of Desires to draw 2. He sets several cards so his back row is full once again. And Gatling Ogre fires, and then it fires, and it fires again, leaving Kalin with 800 life points left before, one more time, he fires again to win the duel. Is what we normally would have said if Kalin didn't have the Infernity 0 in his hand. Infernity 0 can be activated when Kalin's life points hit 0 thanks to the activation of a card effect. He discards his entire hand and then summons the Infernity 0 from his hand. The Infernity 0 cannot be destroyed by battle, and it places a counter on itself every time Kalin would take 500 points of damage. When it has 3 counters on it, Kalin officially loses the duel. He'll also activate this creepy little punk since a card on his field was destroyed thanks to a card effect in order to set his spell card out of his graveyard for the next turn. Lawton has no other plays he can make, as the Gatling Ogre can only sacrifice face-down spells and traps. So even if he sets the last spell card in his hand, he can only do damage 2 times. He needs to do damage 3 times in order to win this duel. So let's see what Kalin can do, because if Lawton draws a single spell or trap out of the 3 cards that are left in his deck next turn, this would be game. Draw phase, and he'll activate the Infernity Pawn from his graveyard, and several other effects will fire in response. First, the Infernity Pawn. During the draw phase, since Kalin has no cards in his hand, he can banish the pawn instead of conducting his draw phase, which will allow his hand to remain empty. Then he can either set a void spell or trap straight from his deck, or he can place an Infernity card from the deck to the top of the deck. Then we'll also see Lawton attempt to stack up effect damage by activating the Secret Barrel to do 200 points of damage for every single card that is in Kalin's hand and that he controls, which is then responded to with the Infernity Death Gunman. It banishes itself when the opponent would activate an effect that deals damage in order to negate the damage. And then Kalin will excavate the top card of his deck with Death Gunman. If it's a monster, then Lawton will take the damage instead. If it's a spell or a trap card, however, the effect damage of Secret Barrel will go through. We also see the effect of Infernity Climber activate. While it's in the graveyard and Kalin has no cards in his hand, it can return itself to the top of Kalin's deck. All these effects finally resolve, so Climber puts itself on top of the deck, meaning that Kalin drew a monster for the effect of Infernity Death Gunman, and he avoids the effect of the Secret Barrel. There are no counters on Infernity Zero this time. Kalin will simply end his turn there, and Lawton will set a card in order to activate the Gatling Ogre's effect, but he had another Death Gunman in the graveyard. What will Kalin activate this time? It looks like Lawton chickened out though, and he chose not to use the effect of the Infernity Death Gunman. Instead, he will switch Gatling Ogre into defense mode, fearing any damage that can come his way in this next turn. Kalin draws the Infernity Climber and pitches it with the Infernity Launcher and ends his turn again, doing nothing for the second turn in a row with 0 life points, as if he has no urgency. It backfires slightly because Lawton is able to set a spell or trap card and activate the Gatling Ogre's effect, putting a counter on the Infernity Zero finally. But he has no more spells and traps, so he ends his turn with 1 card left in his deck. Kalin draws the Infernity Launcher, and he has nothing he needs to do, because once he ends his turn, Lawton is down to the last card in his deck, and unfortunately for him, he has no spells and traps to use. When a duelist has no more cards left in their deck, and their turn comes back around, or they're in a situation where they have to draw, the opponent wins via deck out. So in this epic match, Kalin Kessler has won the duel!